The chandelier above box 12 held 96 candles. Diana Faulkner had counted them during the second act of La Clemenza di Tito, because counting was something her hands could not betray, and her hands had already begun to shake. She sat very still in the velvet chair, her gloves folded in her lap, the Duke of Strathmore beside her in profile. He had not looked at her since they had taken their seats. He had looked at the stage, at his program, at the gilded molding above the proscenium arch, at everything the box afforded except the woman he had asked 4 months ago to be his wife. Across the theater, in box 7, Lady Serena Holt sat with her chin lifted and her throat bare. Diana did not need to look. She had seen her when they arrived. The dark hair, the pale shoulders, the single strand of pearls that caught the light whenever she turned her head. Lady Serena had been positioned with the precision of a chess piece, angled so that her profile was visible from every box on the eastern side. She had smiled at no one. She had not needed to. Her presence was the statement, and she had made it before the overture began. The Duke had seen her too. Diana had felt it in the pause between his footsteps, the half-second delay as he handed her into the box, his fingers stiffening against her gloved palm. He had recovered quickly. He always recovered quickly. But recovery was not the same as honesty, and Diana had spent 4 months learning the difference. They had been introduced at Lady Ashwick's garden party in April, when the roses along the south wall were still in tight bud. He had bowed, she had curtsied. Her father, Sir Geoffrey Faulkner, had beamed with the particular radiance of a man who had secured exactly the match he had spent 3 seasons pursuing, and the Duke had said something courteous about the weather that Diana could not now recall. What she recalled was his hands, the way he held them, one behind his back, the other at his side, both perfectly still. She had thought it was composure. She had admired it even. A man who did not fidget, who did not rush to fill silence with noise. It was only later, watching him across countless drawing rooms and dinner tables, that she understood the stillness was not ease. It was containment. He held himself the way one holds a door shut against a draft, with effort and with the full awareness that something on the other side was pressing. He was afraid of her. Not of her person, not of her conversation or her opinions, which he solicited with genuine interest during their walks through Hyde Park, or her taste in music, which he had indulged by securing this very box for the season. He was afraid of what wanting her would cost him. She had seen it in the way he stood when she entered a room, the slight straightening, the breath drawn a fraction too deep. He wanted to want her. He could not bring himself to surrender to it. There had been a moment, the third walk, late May, the chestnuts in full bloom along the Serpentine, when she had stumbled on a loose stone and his hand had come to her elbow. She had felt every finger through the layers of fabric, felt them tighten and hold and then release, all within the span of a single breath, as though touching her was something he could only endure in fractions. She had looked up at him. His face was turned away. He had removed his hand before she could cover it with hers. At Lady Drummond's dinner in June, seated 4 chairs apart, she had watched him across the table as the soup was cleared. He had been speaking to the Countess of Bridgenorth about his tenants' cottages, roofing, drainage, the sort of practical detail that made other women's eyes glaze, but which he discussed with an attention that revealed more about him than any compliment could. And then, mid-sentence, his gaze had drifted down the table to Diana. He had stopped speaking. The Countess had waited. The silence had stretched for 2, 3, 4 heartbeats before he recovered, and when he resumed his sentence, he had lost his place and had to begin again, and Diana had looked down at her plate and felt something in her chest expand like a held breath finally released. She had told herself this was enough, that a man who was afraid of wanting was still a man who wanted, and that patience, the particular patience her mother had taught her before the fever took her when Diana was 14, would unlock what force could not. It was her aunt, Mrs. Thornwell, who had first mentioned Lady Serena's name. A Thursday afternoon in the parlor, embroidery hoops between them, Mrs. Thornwell's needle pausing over a half-stitched leaf. You are aware, I suppose, that Strathmore was not entirely without attachment before the arrangement was made. Diana's needle had not paused. I am aware. And you are content? I am aware, Aunt. Mrs. Thornwell had studied her for a long moment, then returned to her leaf, and neither of them had spoken of it again. But Diana had lain awake that night and stared at the ceiling of her bedroom and thought, content is not the word. The word is waiting. and I am very good at waiting, but I'm not yet sure what I'm waiting for." She had been wrong. The first act ended. Applause filled the theater like a wave breaking against stone, and Diana sat with her hands in her lap and felt the ring on her left hand, the Strathmore sapphire, square cut, set in old gold that had been worn by 4 duchesses before her. It was too large. It had always been too large. She wore a thread of silk wound beneath the band to keep it from sliding, and when she moved her fingers she could feel the silk tighten against her skin like a question she had been refusing to answer. He had given her the ring in his study at Strathmore House, standing beside the window with the afternoon light falling across the carpet in long, pale rectangles. He had not knelt. He had held the box open with both hands and said, "I hope you will do me the honor," and she had taken the ring and put it on herself because he had not moved to do it, and she had not wanted him to see that her fingers were trembling. 4 months, 16 formal dinners, 9 morning calls, 3 walks in the park with her father's companion, trailing at a discreet distance. He had never once taken her hand without gloves between them. He had never once said her name without the word "Miss" before it, though she had given him permission to use Diana on the second walk, and he had nodded and continued to say Miss Faulkner with a precision that she now understood was not formality but fortification. The interval began. The house lights rose. Around them, the theater rustled with movement, fans opening, opera glasses lowering, the murmur of conversation spreading through the boxes like water finding its level. The Duke turned to her. "Shall I fetch you something to drink, Miss Faulkner?" She looked at him. His face was composed, his eyes steady, his mouth set in the pleasant neutrality he wore like armor. Behind him, through the open curtain of the box, she could see the foyer below beginning to fill, silks and tailcoats and the warm, golden light of 300 candles reflected in marble. And across the theater, in Box 7, Lady Serena Holt rose from her chair and stood at the railing, looking directly at them. Diana felt something shift in her chest. Not anger. She had expected anger, had braced for it since April, since the first whispered mention of Lady Serena's name at a supper she was not meant to overhear. What she felt was clarity, the particular devastating clarity that comes when the last excuse falls away, and the thing you have been avoiding stands before you in full light. He was not going to speak. He was not going to explain or apologize or acknowledge that the woman standing in Box 7 had been in his bed 6 weeks before he offered Diana a ring he could not bring himself to place on her finger. He was going to sit beside her in this velvet box and endure it, endure her, with the same careful, armored silence he brought to everything, and he was going to let her endure it too, because endurance was the only currency he knew how to spend. "No," Diana said. "Thank you." She removed her gloves. She did this slowly, 1 finger at a time, the way her mother had taught her. The left glove first, then the right, folding each neatly and placing them on the rail of the box. The Duke watched her hands with the faint attention of a man who has not yet understood what he is seeing. Diana turned the ring on her finger. The silk thread caught for a moment, then gave. The sapphire slid free. She held it out to him. The Duke looked at the ring in her open palm. He looked at her face. The color left his cheeks in a single slow tide, and she watched it go with the same detached precision with which she had counted the candles. "Miss Faulkner, this belongs to your family," she said. Her voice was steady. She was distantly surprised by this. She had expected it to shake, had prepared sentences in her mind that would survive the shaking, but her voice was clear and level, and it carried in the sudden quiet of the box the way a bell carries across still water. "I am returning it." He did not take it. His hand remained at his side, fingers curled, and she could see the effort it cost him, the tendons standing in his wrist, the rigid line of his jaw. She waited. She gave him 3 full seconds. Then she reached forward and placed the ring in his hand, closing his fingers around it with both of hers, and the touch, skin against skin, the first time without gloves, sent something through her that she would not examine until later, alone in her room with the curtains drawn. She stood. The movement drew eyes. She could feel them, from the boxes on either side, from the stalls below, from the figures already gathering in the foyer with their glasses of wine and their avid, watchful faces. The Duke of Strathmore's betrothed was standing in Box 12 with an expression that was neither distressed nor defiant, but simply, quietly, finished. "Diana," His voice was rough. It was the first time he had used her name. She did not turn. She gathered her shawl, pale gray silk, embroidered at the edges with small white flowers her aunt had stitched, and she walked through the curtain of the box and into the corridor and down the stairs, and every step was measured and every step was watched. The foyer was bright and crowded. She moved through it the way water moves through a channel, without resistance, without hurry, finding the path that the crowd's own movement provided. Faces turned toward her. She saw Lord Pemberton's eyebrows rise above his champagne glass. She saw Mrs. Aldwick's fan stop mid-motion. She saw, at the edge of her vision, the pale oval of Lady Serena Holt's face watching from the gallery above with an expression Diana did not care to read. The doors were ahead. The footman in livery reached for the handle, hesitated, looked at her without a companion, without a cloak, and opened the door. The rain hit her like a wall of cold silk. It had been threatening all evening, the clouds low and heavy over Haymarket when their carriage had arrived, but it had broken fully now, sheets of water falling through the yellow light of the gas lamps and hammering the cobblestones into a dark mirror. Diana walked down the steps and into it. The rain soaked through her gown in seconds, the dove-gray muslin turning dark against her shoulders, her hair coming loose from its pins in heavy wet strands. She did not run, she walked. Across the pavement toward the line of waiting carriages, their lamps glowing like small, steady fires in the downpour. Behind her, the doors opened again. She heard him before she saw him, his footsteps on the wet stone, fast, uneven, the stride of a man who was not walking but pursuing. No hat, no coat. The rain struck his shoulders and darkened his evening tailcoat to black within 3 steps, and he came down the stairs with the ring still in his hand, held in a fist so tight that when he reached her and opened his fingers, the sapphire had left a red mark in his palm. Diana, she stopped. She did not turn. The rain ran down her face and she let it. Diana, please. You did not say one word, she said. Her voice carried over the rain, clear and quiet and entirely without anger. She was there. She was visible to every person in that theater. And you sat beside me and said nothing. I know. 4 months. You have touched my hand 9 times. I have counted. Every time with gloves between us. You have never once. She stopped. Drew breath. The rain was very cold, and her dress was heavy with it, and she could feel the cobblestones through the thin soles of her evening slippers. You are afraid. I have known it since April. I told myself that patience would be enough, that if I waited, if I was steady, if I did not press. She shook her head. The rain scattered from her hair. But I will not sit in a box and be endured, not by anyone, not even by you. He stood in the rain with the ring in his open hand and the water running down his face, and he said, It was not endurance. Then what was it? Terror. The word came out of him like something pulled from deep water, heavy, dragged, reluctant. You terrify me, Diana. Not because of what you are, but because of what I become near you. I lose. He stopped. His jaw worked. The rain was relentless, pounding the pavement around them, and through the bright windows of the opera house she could see faces pressed against the glass, watching. I lose the ability to hold myself apart, and I have held myself apart for so long that I do not know what remains if I stop. And Lady Serena? He flinched. It was the first time she had spoken the name aloud to him. In 4 months of understanding, 4 months of knowing, she had never once said those 2 words, and saying them now felt like pressing a thumb into a bruise she had been pretending did not exist. Lady Serena was... He stopped, started again. The rain drove into his shoulders and ran in rivulets down the front of his waistcoat. She was a woman who required nothing of me. That was her appeal. She asked for nothing. She expected nothing. She permitted me to remain exactly as I was, and I... His voice broke. Not dramatically, not with the crack of a man performing grief, but with the quiet fracture of a man saying something true for the first time. I chose comfort over courage, and I have been choosing it for longer than I wish to admit. You chose it again tonight. You sat beside me and chose it. Yes. Then you should have told me that. You should have said those words in a drawing room, in daylight with tea between us, not here. Not after I had to break myself open in front of 300 people to hear them. I know. Knowing is not enough. I know that too. They stood in the rain. The carriages waited. The coachmen watched from their perches with the studied blankness of men who had seen everything in London after dark and would see everything again tomorrow. Through the opera house windows, the interval crowd pressed closer to the glass. "You will not put that ring on my finger again," Diana said, "until you can say my name in a room full of people without flinching, until you can take my hand without gloves, until you can sit beside me in a theater and look at me. Look at me, not the stage, not the ceiling, not the program, and let me see your face. And if I cannot, then the ring stays in your hand, and I go home to my father's house, and you will have been right to be afraid, not of wanting, but of the waste." He looked at her. The rain had plastered his hair to his forehead, and his cravat was ruined, and the sapphire ring sat in his open palm, filling with water. He looked at her the way a man looks at a door he has kept locked for years and finds, suddenly, standing open. "Will you let me walk you to your carriage?" he said. "No." "Will you let me send mine for you?" "No." "Will you let me stand here until you are safely inside one?" She looked at him. The rain fell between them. "Yes," she said, "you may do that." She turned and walked to the nearest carriage. She spoke to the coachman. She climbed inside without assistance, and as the door closed, she looked through the window and saw him still standing in the rain, the ring in his hand, the water streaming from his coat, watching her go with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not composure. It was ruin. The carriage pulled away. Diana sat in the dark interior with her wet dress pooling water on the leather seat and her hands shaking in her lap, shaking at last, now that no one could see, and she pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window and closed her eyes. 3 days passed. On the first morning, a letter arrived at Sir Geoffrey Faulkner's house in Wimpole Street. Diana's maid brought it on a tray. The seal was Strathmore's, the stag rampant in dark blue wax, and Diana set it on her writing desk without opening it, and went to breakfast with her father, who had heard because all of London had heard, and who looked at her across the eggs and said, "Are you well, my dear?" "Yes, Papa." "Do you wish to speak about it?" "Not yet." He nodded. He returned to his newspaper. He was a man who understood that silence, when it was chosen, was not the same as silence that was imposed, and he gave his daughter the courtesy of the distinction. On the second day, a second letter arrived. Diana placed it beside the first. She sat at her writing desk and looked at the 2 sealed envelopes, the blue wax unbroken, the heavy cream paper smooth beneath her fingertips, and she thought about opening them. She thought about his handwriting, which she had seen only once, on the card that accompanied a posy of violets he had sent after their second walk. The writing had been careful, the letters evenly formed, as though even his penmanship was an exercise in control. She moved the letters to the left side of the desk, aligned them precisely, and went to practice her pianoforte, which she played badly for an hour without hearing a single note. That afternoon, Mrs. Thornwell, her father's oldest friend, a woman of 60 with a tongue like a horsewhip and a heart like risen bread, called and sat in the parlor and said, "The entire opera house is talking. Lord Pemberton has told everyone. The ring, the rain, the Duke standing in it like a drowned man. It is the most romantic thing that has happened in London since Caroline Lamb set fire to her own bonnet." "It was not romantic," Diana said. "It was necessary." "My dear, the two are often the same thing. On the third day, he came himself." Diana was in the morning room, reading, or not reading, holding a book and looking at the page without seeing the words, which was a distinction she had stopped pretending to herself did not exist. The maid announced him. Diana set the book down, spine up, open to a page she would never find again, and said, "Show him in." He stood in the doorway. He was dressed simply, no cravat pin, no watch chain, the kind of plain dark coat a man wore when he was not performing rank but inhabiting it. His hair was combed, his hands were at his sides, he was not holding the ring. "Miss Faulkner," he said. Then he stopped, closed his eyes, opened them. "Diana." The name sat in the room like a struck chord. "Your Grace, I have written you 2 letters. You have not opened them." "No." "May I say what they contained?" She gestured to the chair opposite hers. He sat. He sat the way a man sits when he is aware of every inch of space between himself and another person, and is resisting, with visible effort, the impulse to close it. "The first letter was an apology," he said, "for the opera, for Lady Serena. For every evening I sat beside you with my hands in my lap when they wanted." He stopped. when I wanted to reach for you. And the second? The second letter was the truth, which I should have spoken in April when I gave you a ring I could not place on your finger because if I had touched your hand, I would not have been able to let go, and I was not ready to be a man who could not let go. He paused. His gaze moved to the window, then back to her, and she saw the effort of the return, the deliberate choosing to look at her instead of away. I called on Lady Serena on the morning after the opera, he said. Diana's hands went still in her lap. I went to her house at 10 o'clock. I told her that whatever had existed between us was finished, and that it had been finished from the moment I saw you in Lady Ashwick's garden, whether I had been honest enough to say so or not. He swallowed. I should have done it in April. I should have done it before I offered you the ring. I did not because I was keeping her as a door I could retreat through, and that is the thing I am most ashamed of. Not that she existed, but that I kept her as an escape from wanting you. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. Somewhere in the house, a door closed. Diana looked at the man sitting across from her and felt something shift. Not forgiveness, which would come later, slowly, earned, but recognition. The recognition that honesty, when it finally arrives, carries its own particular weight, and that the weight was not hers to lift for him. "And now?" she said. He reached into his coat and took out the ring. He held it for a moment, not in a box, not on a tray, but in his bare hand, the sapphire catching the morning light. Then he moved from the chair. He knelt on the carpet in front of her, properly, both knees, which was not the fashionable way, but was the way a man knelt when he meant it. And he held out the ring and said, "I am not asking you to take it back. I'm asking you to let me put it on your finger. Without gloves, without silk underneath. I want it to fit you, Diana, not the family. You." Her eyes burned. She blinked once hard. "It is too large," she said. "I've had it sized." His voice was rough. "I took it to the jeweler on the first morning, before I wrote the first letter. I wanted it to be right." She looked at the ring. She looked at his face. He was not composed. He was not armored. He was kneeling on her father's carpet with his heart in his hand and the fear still in his eyes, but held now, held the way a man holds a horse's reins, not to stop but to steady. She extended her left hand. He took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm, bare, no gloves, and he slid the ring onto her finger and it fit. It fit exactly. The sapphire sat against her skin without thread, without adjustment, and his hand remained around hers and neither of them moved. "You will look at me," she said quietly. "In theaters, in ballrooms, across breakfast tables. You will look at me, Lawrence?" "Yes." "You will not hold yourself apart?" "No." "And if she is in a room, any woman, you will turn to me, not away from her, to me." "To you." His thumb moved against her knuckle. "Always to you." Sir Geoffrey Faulkner, passing the morning room door on his way to his study, glanced inside and saw his daughter's hand in the Duke's hand, and the Duke on his knees, and the morning light falling across them both like a benediction. He continued to his study. He closed the door. He sat at his desk and removed his spectacles and cleaned them for longer than was strictly necessary, and when he put them back on his eyes were bright. They married 6 weeks later at St. George's, Hanover Square. The morning was clear and warm, and the church was full, and when the Duke took her hand at the altar, he did it without gloves, and the congregation noticed, and Diana noticed them noticing, and she thought, "Let them see. Let everyone see." Lady Serena Holt was not present. She had left London the week after the opera, bound for her sister's house in Devonshire, and the Ton noted her departure the way it noted all departures, with interest, with speculation, and with the particular satisfaction of a story that had resolved in favor of the person they had been watching. Lord Pemberton attended the wedding. He sat in the third row and watched the Duke's face as the vows were spoken, and told Mrs. Aldwych afterward, "I've never seen a man look so terrified and so certain at the same time." And Mrs. Aldwych said, "That, Lord Pemberton, is what the institution is for." The first test came in October at the Marchioness of Leighton's ball, the largest event of the autumn season, the kind of evening where 600 candles burned in the chandeliers and every family of consequence pressed into rooms designed for half their number. Diana dressed carefully, the dove-gray silk, the sapphire at her throat that matched the ring, her mother's pearl combs in her hair. She had not asked him if he was ready. She had not needed to. They entered the ballroom together. The crowd always noticed a new duchess, measured her against the women who had come before, catalogued her gown and her jewels and the way she held her husband's arm. Diana felt the weight of their attention like sunlight through glass, warm, concentrated, inescapable. And then she saw, across the room, near the windows that overlooked the terrace, a woman she did not recognize lean toward her companion and whisper something behind her fan. And both women looked at Diana and then at the Duke, and their expressions held the particular avidity of people watching to see whether a story they had heard would prove true. The Duke saw them too. Diana felt his arm shift beneath her hand, the old instinct, the withdrawal, the door swinging shut. She waited. She did not look at him. She looked at the room, at the candles, at the orchestra tuning in the gallery, and she waited to see what he would do. He turned to her. In full view of the Marchioness's ballroom, in front of every family that mattered and several that did not, the Duke of Strathmore turned to his wife and said, "Will you dance with me, Diana?" Her name, in a room full of people, without flinching. "Yes," she said, "I will." He led her onto the floor. The orchestra began, and as they moved through the first figure of the dance, his hand found hers, bare, warm, his fingers lacing through hers in a way that was not part of any choreography, and the two women by the window watched, and the whispers spread through the room, the way warmth spreads through a house when the fires are properly lit. And Diana looked up at her husband's face and found him already looking at her, and she thought, "There you are. There you have always been." In the years that followed, the story of the ring at the opera became one of those tales that London kept and polished and passed along like a coin rubbed smooth. The details shifted. Some said she had thrown the ring, others that she had placed it gently, others still that she had said something devastating before she walked out, though no one could agree on the words. What they agreed on was the rain, the Duke standing in it, the way he had not moved until her carriage was gone. At Strathmore Park, in the library that overlooked the South Gardens, the sapphire ring sat in a glass dish on the Duchess's writing desk. She wore it daily and removed it each evening, and the Duke, passing through on his way to dress for dinner, would sometimes pause and touch the ring with one finger. A small, private gesture that no one else saw, and that meant more to both of them than anything spoken. Their daughter was born the following spring, a girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stillness, whom they named Elise. The Duke held her on the morning of her christening with the same careful, terrified tenderness with which he had once held a ring in the rain, and when Diana reached over and steadied his hand with hers, he looked at her across the child's head, and his face was open and unguarded and entirely, irrevocably hers. Mrs. Ware, the housekeeper at Strathmore Park, told Pallister, the steward on the evening the family arrived for the summer. She did not change him. She showed him that the door he was holding shut was already open. Pallister, who was not a man given to sentiment, nodded once and went to ensure the nursery fires were lit. And in the desk drawer in the library, beside the glass dish and the ring, there was a small folded piece of paper, a note written in the Duke's hand that Diana had found on her pillow the morning after their wedding. It said only, "I looked at you all evening. I will look at you every evening. I am not afraid." She had kept it. She kept it still, years later, when the sapphire had been joined by other rings and the library shelves held their daughter's first attempts at watercolor, and the South Gardens bloomed with the roses Diana had planted in the beds the old Duchess had let go bare. She kept it the way one keeps a key to a door that no longer needs locking, not because it was useful, but because it was proof that the lock had once existed and that someone had chosen, despite everything, to turn it. They arrive here, like a ring returned and offered again whenever they are ready.